Okay,
good.
welcome everyone.
So good.
So
Yay.
glad to have you all here. We wanted to start y'all off with some feel-good music. Welcome. I'm Danielle. I'm the CEO of Women Talk Design, and we are so excited to have you join in for our very first couch cushion conversation. So excited. For those of you who this is your first interaction with Women Talk Design, wanted to give a quick intro to who we are and what we do. Our larger mission is that we really want to see a more diverse group of speakers on stage. And so we work with women and non-binary folks in design and tech at large. We have a speaker directory, if you go to our website, that has over 500 speakers from around the world. We work with event organizers on how they can design more inclusive events that our speakers want to be a part of. And we also host trainings and events and really work to build a community amongst our speakers to be able to support one another. And so again, really excited to have you all here. This is our first time doing an event like this. We have to, as the description said, adapt to the times that we're in. And so I'm really grateful to Margo Bloomstein, who's going to be one of our speakers today. She's an advisor with Women Talk Design and came with this idea and was like, this is, a lot of us are figuring this out and trying to figure out, how do we really transition to online and virtual, and how can we share more with the community? And so for today's event, that's what we're going to be talking about, how as new speakers, as experienced speakers, as instructors, as people who are leading and facilitating meetings online, how do we make this transition to virtual? Before I introduce our speakers, kind of a quick logistics. We are going to be taking questions at the end, but feel free to contribute to the Q&A throughout. And if there's a relevant question as we're going, we'll chime in. There's a Q&A button at the bottom here, and you can add in your question, and we'll make sure to get to that. And then we'll also, after the event, there'll be a follow-up survey, because we definitely want to hear how your experience was with this, and we'd love to do more of them. So please make sure to fill that out. Without further ado, very, very excited to introduce our speakers. So we have Margo Bloomstein, as I mentioned, who is a content and brand strategist, the principal of Appropriate Inc. She's written a book on content strategy at work, and is also working on another book right now on trust that I know she'll give us some sneak peeks into, and how that relates to speaking, especially in a virtual environment, and leads workshops and delivers keynotes, and obviously really, really relevant to our conversation today. And then next we have Denise Jacobs, who we're so excited to also have joining us. She's the founder and CEO of The Creative Dose. She is also a keynote speaker, a trainer. She wrote the book Banish Your Inner Critic, and has provided a ton of resources on that. Between Denise and Margo, they've spoken at events all over the world, from UX London and UX Week, South by Southwest, all types of major events, and now trying to figure out, okay, how do we now bring this online? So they're gonna share that with us today. Quick one more thing I wanted to add, and thank you, Margo, for putting this in the chat. We'd love for you to help us share this conversation online. And so I know Denise had mentioned, if you hear any truth bombs, which I love, or just any quotes you want to share, please use our hashtag #CouchConvo and tag us. Our information in the chat. So I'd love to get started. I love if Denise and Margo, you can share, before COVID really started to come into our lives and change our day-to-days, what did you have planned for this year, especially as it comes to speaking engagements or public events, and how has that now shifted with what's happening?
Margo, you can go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Well, I can tell you, over the next few months, I had plans to be speaking at a conference in Stockholm. I was going to be doing a keynote in Amsterdam. I was going to be teaching workshops in both of those locations, and speaking at an event in Boston. And then in addition, as Danielle mentioned, over the past few years, I've been researching the topic of trust in communication, how businesses and brands and governmental organizations can foster greater trust among their different audiences through their choices in content and design. And today it feels like every other day I'm getting a new case study. So I've been having more of those conversations around how we foster trust as organizations, but then also how do individuals foster trust through our content choices when maybe
Mm.
previously we could have face-to-face interactions and now we're kind of mediated through our screens. What do we have to do differently? So we'll get into some of that today. And then, so I'm still doing work on the book. Knock on wood, things are still moving ahead according to plan and all. My publisher feels good about that, and also that's due out spring of next year. And then the other big thing that I focus on over the past 5 years, I've been teaching at the graduate level, developing curriculum at the graduate level, and it's all been entirely online. So I've taught for a remote program in the graduate school at Columbia University, and then for the past 4 years, I've been teaching for a graduate program in Graz, Austria, that takes in students from. I've had students from Minneapolis and Berlin and Vienna and everything in between there. So in that context, some of my world hasn't changed. Now I think with that program may see even more participants now that more people are realizing that online communication and online learning can be just as effective, that we can still build community this way. And I think that as people adjust to our new constraints, new responsibilities for folks that are now juggling childcare at home and homeschooling and still trying to also figure out where work fits in and just kind of our own emotional well-being fits in. I think that we're going to see more of those types of opportunities emerge as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. So much like Margot, I had several international engagements planned and scheduled. I have one which, you know, is kind of a TBD for June in Hamburg, Germany, a keynote there. I was in conversation with an institute in Cairo to do like a workshop, a weekend workshop there. Was asked to speak at a conference in Amsterdam that's also going to be in June, and still don't know, and you know, have had several inquiries for things in June and some things in the fall, and now it feels like it's not so much that they aren't happening exactly, but it's more that everybody's kind of holding their breath, right? That there's this kind of collective, like, I can't really move forward until I have a better, you know, until we have a better sense of what's going to be happening, you know, how long it will take for the curve to flatten, when it will be, you know, shelter in place orders will be lifted and whatnot, and travel bans. I mean, what I saw, I think it was on Facebook or Twitter, somebody was like, yeah, I was on a flight from LAX to JFK and I was literally the only person on the plane. Like the plane was just empty. And so, so there, that part is certainly interesting and a change. But the other thing that I found, kind of much like Margot, I also teach courses, online courses. I develop and create online courses for LinkedIn Learning. And that started last year. And very fortuitously, I must say, because, you know, I develop the courses and then we go and shoot them and then they release them. And then, you know, I see kind of benefits and stuff from that. And so I already am in the system with them and am kind of contracted to create a couple, at least 2 more courses, if not a couple more. And so that, in that respect, much like Margot, it's different, but it's also very similar because I already have this virtual, so to speak, income revenue stream developed. So, and that a lot of what I was planning to do, spend a lot of this month and next month doing, was actually perfecting my my outreach system. And most of the things that you do outreach for are, you know, somewhere in the 6 to 10 or 12 month window anyway. So I wasn't even thinking that, you know, I would really see benefits from that. I wouldn't really be scheduling anything until the fall. Anyway, so it's kind of an interesting mix of all of that stuff. But definitely, it's definitely a change, but for me, at least, it's not so much of a change that it's like night and day. Also, I'm very used to working from the road, and I'm currently not at home. I'm actually in San Francisco for work reasons and for personal reasons. And so it's just kind of like, okay, well, this is the now normal, right? Yeah.
Definitely. I know that you both shared a lot about, you know, how you've been doing things online already. And I know that people have some questions about some best practices and tips for that. But first, I'd love to start off, you know, Women Talk Design works a lot with new speakers. And a lot of people, I'm sure, were excited about maybe they got their first speaking engagement, that the event then got canceled, or had been looking to start speaking. And, you know, at this time, it's like, how do I even do that? And so I will dive into, you know, some tips and how you're handling things as experienced speakers in a minute, but I'd love if we could start off talking about how new speakers can navigate and handle this time.
Well, I'd love to give some insights. So in a lot of ways, even though I'm an experienced speaker, I very clearly remember the period of time when I was not an experienced speaker, and when I started off as a speaker, and when I wanted to speak at all these conferences, and I literally had no idea how to do it. And so one of the things that I did, and one of the things I think is probably still relevant even now, is to reach out to conference organizers and to reach out to places and to say, you know, I know you had this scheduled. Do you have any plans for taking it virtually or whatever? If there's anything, you know, I would love to be a part of the event. And if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know, because that's part, I think, of what, and this goes as an experienced speaker as well, say that 5 times fast. But that right now, I feel like one of the things that this pandemic is really teaching us is the kind of power of community, and the power of being of service, and the power of being useful, and realizing that it's not just about us, any one person as an individual, but it is about what we can do kind of for the greater good and for the collective good. And so I feel like it's kind of helping us to step into a place of being more compassionate and being more empathetic. And even though you may be panicked personally and thinking, oh, this is like all this opportunity is gone, it is actually that the opportunity is just transformed, right? And so there may be something, you know, you may be an online marketing specialist, and the people who are doing the conference are absolutely clueless about how to do online marketing, or, you know what I mean? And there could be this like really wonderful opportunity that you could have to help, and then also in kind of, you know, endear yourself to the organizers at the same time. So that was just one thought. I want to leave space after that. Yeah, go ahead.
I think like along those same lines, like you mentioned, like reaching out to conference organizers. I know a number of the events where I was supposed to be physically have now gone virtual, and scrambling a little bit to try to figure out what does that mean as far as hallway conversations. What do we still do to establish that sense of community and all the opportunities that come out of community? And I think that when you can show that you can partner with them in that way,
exactly,
that's a terrific thing. And I would say that idea of community, that's one of those like think global, act local type of things as well. And I think when we talk about social distancing, we realize that it doesn't necessarily need to be about distancing ourselves from that sense of community and the spirit of community. So I'd say if you're a new speaker, now is also a great time to work on figuring out what your first talk topic will be, and start reaching out to local community organizers. I mean, maybe it's the people that run like the local UX meetup, or in my case, maybe the local content strategy meetup, or the little smaller the small business associations that are always looking to bring in speakers. Now they don't have the budget to bring in speakers. There's no in to bring them into anymore, but maybe they're trying to figure out, what does it mean to have an event over Zoom? And if you can be that speaker that is easy to work with, that has a somewhat polished first talk to deliver, this is where you can start out. I started speaking professionally about 10 years ago. And my first big talk was at South by Southwest. But leading up to that, I spoke at the Atlanta Content Strategy Meetup, the New York Content Strategy Meetup, the Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver Content Strategy Meetups, the Boston Content Strategy Meetup. And in all those places, I basically said, if you can get me there and put me up at whatever cheap hotel, I'm there. Now it's even easier because we don't have to say, bring me there. Now it's just a matter of saying, I can be on Zoom at this time. And then I think as you kind of improve your technique for presenting virtually, that will help you then when you're able to present on an actual physical stage. And by that I mean, like, some of the things that even more experienced professional speakers don't necessarily do well when they're in front of a camera like this, but that you can work on. Maybe it's even just through like the Zoom chats that you have with family in the evening, or maybe like with your coworkers. If you're constantly in the position of presenting your work to colleagues, maybe because they're all remote, or maybe because now they're all at home, you can still work on the techniques of how do you make sure you're making eye contact? Well, it means make everybody's windows smaller and physically drag them to be right underneath your camera. And I guess that's one little tip on that. What I discovered back in the 90s in a small rural high school was that in order to offer more classes, my school participated in distance learning, which meant in a special classroom where there was a big TV in the front, we saw kids in a bunch of other area school districts. And we learned the biggest distraction was always seeing yourself on the monitor, because we were all like, what's my hair doing? You know? And that stayed with me, though, that you tend to look at yourself when you got a picture of yourself in front of you. So if you can drag your own picture to be right under your camera, it's going to look like you're making eye contact with your viewer. And then also try to orient yourself so that maybe you're facing a window, or there's a window off to one side giving you natural light. You don't need to have like a big fancy lighting set up, but if people can see you well, you'll look more professional. You'll present more professionally. And that goes if you're a new speaker or somebody speaking just to colleagues in a company, or if you're a professor that's now presenting online for the first time.
And I actually want to tag on to that, is that making sure you look good and also making sure you sound good, right? So making sure that your sound is clear and everything. And for new speakers, as well as experienced speakers, and I saw this in a speakers group that I'm in on Facebook, and one guy who's a very experienced speaker is like, I really miss being on stage, and so what I plan to do, and what I recommend that everybody else does, is to always be practicing. So, if you've gotten to the point, if you're a new speaker, you've already gotten to the point where you know what your content is going to be, you've started your outline and everything, to actually start practicing stuff. And my recommendation is to not try to practice the whole presentation at once, is to actually think about the presentation in modules. This is a tip that one of my mentors, Molly Holtschlag, gave me way back in 2010 or 2011. And she was like, make your content modular so that you can actually think about like that. And this is actually what doing the LinkedIn Learning courses helped me, is to think 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes of how I'm going to talk about this one topic. If it's going to have a story or an anecdote with it, if it's going to have a learning point or whatever, how can I do that in this kind of 3-minute bit, basically? And then practice that bit or a few bits, but don't try to practice the whole presentation all at once, not at first at least. And once you have your modules, or once you have your bits, then you can string them together and see how they work together and all of that. So that's another tip for you.
Yeah. And I see in the notes, I'm twice as loud as Denise. And I know in real life, I think we're both pretty loud.
Well, I adjusted and see, this is what we have to do. We have to be adaptable and we have to be agile. If we get feedback for something, we got to be able to work with it. So I put my headset in so that people can hear me better. That's just what we're doing in motion and work.
And creative, flexible, adjusting on the fly. That's the name of the game now.
That is totally the name of the game. I think that's probably a setup for you, Danielle.
So now I want to talk a little bit about some advice for more experienced speakers. So maybe speakers that had events that were lined up that were either, I know some were postponed to next year. Some were moving remote. I know someone mentioned in here, Jason said that a workshop for UXPA is now moved online. And so would love to share how you're thinking about things as an experienced speaker with this new transition to online, and more like holistically, and then we can get into the nitty-gritty details of like how to actually do it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in some of the conversations that I've had with meeting planners and event organizers, there was one that I had been talking with that when they announced that that the conference was going to go virtual, like he reached out initially and he said, are you still in if we do this? And I was like, oh yeah, sign me up, because to me, it feels like another way to engage the audience and to still kind of keep momentum and enthusiasm around the topic. I don't know if you can tell from the height of my eyebrows, but I have a lot of enthusiasm. And it's only getting higher. And to me, it feels like this is all, I don't want to say like a golden era of accessibility, but it's such a wonderful time to make our events more accessible. I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about it, because obviously we're in a horrible situation. But I think and I hope that our events will learn and take good things from this horrible situation. Events used to come, conferences come with a lot of privilege for both speakers and attendees, because you probably need to take time off. You've got to travel there. You need to have a budget to travel there. If you have kids, you have to figure out the childcare situation. And then you've got to kind of step away emotionally from home and from your other work and whatnot. And now we're able to change that a little bit. I know personally, like there was an event at Harvard on Monday, the Harvard Digital Connect. And when I initially signed up for it, it was an afternoon thing. And I was thinking, oh, I'm gonna have to leave my office early just to slog through traffic to get down there. I'm gonna miss tucking in my daughter that evening, but okay, I'll make it work. And it still happened this week. It was online. I was here for it. Then I left my office and we just had dinner a little later, and then I tucked her in. And it was great. So it became more accessible to me as a parent. And also, if it was recorded, then it goes on YouTube where we can easily add captioning for people that want to take in information audibly and then want to be able to pause it, think about it, take some notes. We can do that. Or if there are people that are both visual and verbal learners, it's a lot easier to nurture all those different learning styles to make our events technically and socially more accessible. So I think those are great things. And that's kind of part of the way in which I'm partnering with organizations now to help them realize that potential. And then as far as kind of reframing some of the discussions around compensation and all, I don't know if we want to get into that at this point, but in some of the conversations we had with organizers, we're talking about, well, what's the real value there? And now are there other ways to add value too? Maybe in offering other things for attendees, like to offer additional like mentoring around the event, more one-on-one conversations in Zoom, different ways that they can kind of customize the experience more. So, I mean, just to like share one other anecdote on that, and then I will stop talking for a while. I had an event this past week that said, hey, you were contracted to come in for this. Now we're going to go virtual. Can we look at your rate? And no one's taking a look at my mortgage. Those payments still exist. But, you know, I'm sympathetic to where they are. But at the same time, I didn't want to be like the only speaker that was a sap and saying like, yeah, let's cut my rate. But I think also, and this is particularly relevant, I think, as a woman in the industry, I didn't want to come off as like the only like hard nose on this to say like, is my rate. So instead, I tried to figure out a middle path there to say, how do we make this a win-win-win situation for me, for you, for the other for the attendees as well? So that's when I approached them around saying, well, what if we keep my rate the same, but instead let me do more? Because one thing that I have right now is a little more time. And I still consult with companies. I still do like one-on-one talks with them about this type of stuff. The topic that I was going to be speaking about was how we build trust through choices in content and design. So I said, well, what if for like the top 50 people or companies that opt in, they each get like a half hour free of or no fee of my time to talk about tailoring the lessons in my talks specifically to their company? Or what if we do 50-hour-long mentoring sessions for the first 50 people that opt in to have that with me? Like, I love that because it's a chance for me to nurture our industry. And then the one-on-one time with companies, like, that's how I build my pipeline. Plus, I love hearing, and like to be able to get that time with people that are opting in to talk to me. Yes, I want that. And if I can help them too, and I get to hear about like all the thorny challenges they're facing, yes, I want that.
And then the organizers were completely amenable to that, right?
Yes, they were very enthusiastic. The email started out with, and I'm only sharing this because I did that on the recommendations of other people. So I feel safe in sharing this. But the response started out with, "You're brilliant. Let's do that," because, and then they went on to say, the value that you're adding is so much greater than what we would be asking you to subtract from your fee. And the people that gave me the encouragement and recommendations to do that, they are brilliant. And now I'm sharing with all of you as well. So go be brilliant.
I love that, Margo. Denise, how are you thinking about compensation during this time, especially with the virtual space?
Well, you know, I'm part of the same speakers group that Margo is, where she got the brilliant recommendations that helped her put that together. And actually, whenever I run into problems, they're often my go-to to help me solve things that I feel like that are just not within my purview and that I don't have experience with. I fortunately haven't had to have that conversation yet, because all of my events are kind of further in the distance, kind of in the future, and are not kind of in this immediate, you know, March, April, or even May time frame. So thankfully for myself, I haven't had to delve into those conversations, but there is a good chance that I may. Now, one thing I did a couple of years ago was talking to a company, and they're like, we have this virtual series, and we'd like you to do the virtual series, and you know, what's your speaking rate? And I went to this group actually, and I was like, what should I say? And several people were like, look, just because it's virtual doesn't mean you're not delivering the same amount of value. Right. And so I think that's also a helpful mind frame and a helpful mindset to come into. Just because you're not getting on a plane and staying in a hotel and catching an Uber to wherever you need to go to give the hour-long presentation or the 2-hour workshop or the all-day workshop or whatever, doesn't mean that you're not delivering the same amount of value. And so just because it's in a virtual context, you still have to prep for it. You still have to show up. You still have to deliver and connect and give the same content and the same information that you would in person. And so the kind of the argument of, well, you're not going anywhere doesn't really hold water very well. So I would encourage you to go into the conversation standing in your value and making sure that you stand strong in that, and then to do like Margo and the other brilliant people who have given us recommendations, then say, okay, what else can I do to add value? Like that doesn't kind of conflict with like your time or your energy or whatever, and that you can still, you can still be a valuable thing, and that you're also, that you think of yourself, you see yourself as a partner with the event, right? And with the event planners, that you are, and that you always were, right? But it seems different. It's like, oh, they're my client, or it's the audience that I'm doing for, but you're really working together to create this great event, right? And to deliver the value to the audiences and to the attendees. And so I feel like one of the great things, one of the gifts that we have gotten from this period of time is that shift in thinking, that people are starting to think more collectively and in terms of community and partnership, far more, I think, than we really did before, than we were kind of forced to in this era. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you both for contributing your perspective on that. It's so great to think about, like, yes, I'm still delivering this value, and then here are the other things that I can add. So that's great. I would love to dive in a bit to how to actually deliver a talk online, right? So I know that there's some maybe technical pieces of this, but also how do you think about preparation and delivery? And so we can maybe break those pieces up a bit. But I guess maybe first let's start. How do you prepare for an online talk?
I would love to talk about that, because I feel like preparing for the talk can actually be like kind of one of the most enjoyable parts of the talk, or parts of the process. Because for me, when I prepare for a keynote and everything, maybe it's been a little bit since I've dealt with the content, and then I start to really focus on the content and the audience and the event and the theme and how I want to connect with people, and really what I want them to feel and do afterwards. And so that preparation time is actually really important for that. And so one of the things that I do kind of for a virtual situation as opposed to a live situation is to make sure that kind of some of the technical things are in place, but that I also make sure that I still have the connection with the audience, and try to kind of simulate the same kind of connection with the audience that I would in person. So making sure that I'm, looking at the camera, making sure that I'm still making, expressions with my face, that I'm not using too much of a monotone, that there's enough variation in my voice and in the delivery so that it is really engaging. And another thing that I like to do, because it's one of my specialties in person, is to make sure I also bake in engagement in it. And I act as if I am with a live audience, and I have exercises that I do that actually require engagement, and then ask for feedback through the chat and through kind of the feedback channels that I can get, so that I realize that I am connecting with people. So those are some tips.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess if I could jump on that as well.
Go ahead.
When I think about kind of translating talks to an online experience, and I know there's a question about workshops specifically, and I don't want to go into some detail there, but like as Denise was saying, we're thinking about how we're engaging the audience, and specifically like how to maintain their attention. Because previously, if you're standing up in front of an audience in a big, hotel gallery, ballroom, or whatever, or a big lecture hall or something, yeah, you're competing against, against their phone and all. You're fighting this, but hopefully they're using it just to live tweet what you're doing.
And take pictures.
And you can see where I put down the hashtag for this event as well there, Couch Convo. And you're competing against that. But in general, it's a more rich environment where they're being engaged by the lighting and the sound and your physical presence on stage and all of your body language and all. And frankly, you can't see if I'm like tap dancing right now. I'm not, but you can't see that. So it's not as engaging. And I found that when I'm like lecturing remotely and all, like when I'm developing content for an online course, I'll usually move between the different platforms and modalities of engagement. By that I mean, I might mention in class what the upcoming topic is, or the next class is going to be about, and then in the courses channel, I'll also start peppering some questions in there leading up to the next class. And then when I'm actually speaking in class, it's what was previously an hour-long talk, now I need to think about it more in chunks and modules. And I know you talk about this a lot, Denise.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's usually like 20-minute segments. That's usually what people are good at, kind of 15 to 20 minutes of sitting and kind of paying attention and being engaged before they're distracted by everything else. Maybe the kids that they're homeschooling right next to them on the couch. But I can go about 20 minutes talking, but then I want to get them talking. So maybe we break into separate Zoom chats. Maybe that's the point where I say, you know, tell me about your experience with this topic. Have you encountered it in your own work? And I get them talking back to me. Or maybe that's when I break from the slides and then they see my face again, and I share an anecdote that's a little bit more conversational or on the fly. So I'm kind of switching up my tone of voice every 20 minutes as well. And
There's actually, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were, go ahead.
No, so I was just going to say, like, as far as kind of changing it and adapting it in that way, I think more in terms of like what other tools we can use to engage. Like if I'm moving between something that's face-to-face as well as then Slack, and then when I'm giving them assignments and like points to connect, it's also then saying, all right, we're going to have this discussion live in class, but then afterward, I want you to go away and maybe work in groups. And for any kind of like paired or group work, I'll demand more frequent interaction around that as well. So it might be if the classes are spaced a week apart, or if I'm teaching an online course that's spaced a week apart, it might be that in 2 days, I need you to post in the Slack channel who your is going to be. 2 days after that, tell me what your research technique is going to be or what topic you're researching. So I'm asking them to over communicate. And that's something that I think applies entirely to all of us in this time. Like if you used to engage face-to-face in the office and be able to kind of share in those sort of shared experiences of what just happened like in the break room, now we need to over communicate our presence, be a little bit more transparent about what's going on, or like the other anxieties and constraints and priorities in our lives. And I think it's that over communication now that is going to help kind of hold things together.
I was going to say, Margo, when I so rudely interrupted you and I thought you were done, there's a great book. I can't entirely remember the name of the author. I think John Medina. Ooh, it's called Brain Rules. And it's by John Medina. And I can't believe that came to me fully formed in my head. It's been years since I've read it, but he is a top professor at the University of Washington, and he studies attention and brain function. And he was one of the top lecturers because he actually knew what people's attention patterns were, and he would structure his lectures to capitalize on people's peak attention, and then when it starts to wane, he was saying it was somewhere, you know, I think it varies depending on folks, but it was somewhere in like the 10 to 12 minutes. And so he would start to change he would make sure that everything he wanted to say about a topic, he would build up, he would kind of peak at like 10 minutes, 9 minutes, and then finish up by about the 11 or 12 minute mark. And then he would start another another concept. And that way he was able to capitalize on people's natural attention kind of spans and how their cadence for that. So that's also a really good, I mean, it's a good resource. And I can't believe I remember the name. I'm so proud of myself.
Yeah, awesome.
About like the cadence and the rhythm, I think that applies to a lot of aspects of online meetings, online workshops, just when we're thinking in terms of, like, whenever I'm planning like a physical workshop or an in-person workshop that's going to be a half day or a full day, I'm always kind of working with the meeting planner to figure out what are people eating and when, because come in early if they've just had like the conference breakfast of like coffee and bagels and like with a side of more carbs. I know they're not going to be really creative and productive until they've also gotten some protein. So I'm usually the person that's like, can we get a little bit of cottage cheese or some peanut butter up in here as well? And it's getting that, both the energy to shoot up and then be sustained. That's what allows them to do more creative work. So you may want to think about that now as you're like dealing with people. If they're all in the same time zone, it makes it a little easier, but it's also okay to start meetings and say, you know, everybody bring your, let's have happy hour, well, maybe not happy hour, but let's all have coffee together. Bring your breakfast. Like, let's start, like, say, bring some protein so that we can be thinking and productive. And I feel like it's thinking more consciously about those types of things and how we can tap into them that that allows us to be more productive in this time. But that whole issue around the cadence, I think when we look at like how workshops shift, and kind of like the flow during them as well, that's where like food type stuff fits in.
Totally.
We had another question in here about some of the tools other than video you recommend for collaboration during an online workshop. So I know that, you know, we talked about Zoom and breakout rooms. I think, Margo, you also might have mentioned Slack, but are there any other tools that you would recommend for collaboration or even audience engagement?
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is if you can make it more lo-fi, more low-tech, do it. Because that's what allows our experiences to be more accessible and sort of more democratized to more people, because not everybody's on a high bandwidth connection. A lot of people are online only on their phones. And if we demand that they, you know how to navigate breakout rooms or whatever, it may be putting, or like using some complex online card sorting tool, maybe it's putting too much of an interface to mediate between them and the experience that we want them to have. So like, for example, one of the activities that I do in face-to-face workshops is using brand sort cards and card sorting to figure out a message architecture. It's everybody's hands touching cards and working together. Two things that we don't want a lot of right now.
Not per se.
Although I do think you can wipe them down with a bleachy wipe. So that might have some possibilities in the future. But so what I do now, and this is actually what I've been doing for a while when an organization can't all be co-located for a workshop, when they have people that are spread out, I'd rather everyone is using the same tools so that no one feels like their experience is lesser than. Instead, I take all the words that are on those cards, put them in a Word doc, PDF it, email it out to everybody ahead of time, and then we do a lot of thinking aloud. So rather than saying, let's put this card over here in this pile, instead we agree, all right, all the cards that are going into that grouping, we're all going to circle them on our respective sheets. And then people will start talking and saying, are we innovative? Let's all circle innovative. And then, are we traditional? Let's all circle that, so that we're still having a shared experience. It's incredibly low tech, but it still works, and it works for everybody so that everyone still gets a satisfying experience. And that's really one of the big things that we want to have during workshops, whether they're virtual or not. Does everyone get a sense that, yeah, I'm learning, I'm keeping up with things, and I got my money out of that. I got what I paid for, and it was satisfying. And that transcends platforms.
Yeah,
So true.
That's great advice for a live workshop and when everyone's there together. And I wanted to ask Denise, I know that you mentioned a LinkedIn learning class that you were doing.
Yes.
Full transparency, I haven't had experience with the LinkedIn learning class, but I imagine that it's not all live. And so I'd love if you can share any lessons of when you're thinking about doing a workshop that's not live, but still remote, some considerations there.
Well, you know, it's really interesting. So I want to talk about the LinkedIn learning situation, because so I've been doing developing courses with LinkedIn Learning, and now I have 3. One that's going to be coming out next week, actually next Monday, on creative collaboration. I'm actually a little nervous about it because it actually shows like collaborative exercises with people like in the same place and actually sharing space with each other. So I don't know if people are going to be like, oh my God, they're so close to each other. Just getting the heebie-jeebies just looking at it. But there are really good tips for collaboration and working together with other people. And unblocking your creativity for that. But the great thing about doing those courses, and this is actually translated into helping me kind of manage and navigate moving to a virtual format, is that first of all, I'm on camera and I'm getting these filmed, and so it made me very, very comfortable with being on camera. Made me very comfortable with using a teleprompter, and so now I've been able to kind of jerry-rig teleprompter, or at least being able to see slides while giving virtual presentations. So just did something very lo-fi with had a tripod and had my phone as the camera on there, and then just put some boxes and some tape, something so that I had the computer underneath where the phone was, and made sure that the screen was just underneath where the camera was, so that my going from the camera to the slides wasn't too jarring and didn't look like I was breaking eye contact. That was really helpful. The interesting thing that I remembered is that I actually used to do, way back in the day, 10 years ago, did a lot of CSS trainings when my first book, The CSS Detective Guide, came out, and I used to be like a front-end developer person, which I've forgotten all that information since then. But but I used to actually do not like couple hours, but like literal, like all day from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. workshops. The same workshop that I would do, actually I think it was a 2-day workshop for my clients that were remote virtual workshops. Incidentally, I charged the same amount for the virtual workshop as I did for the in-person workshop, except for I didn't have to worry about travel and hotel. And very heavily used. Like Margo said, went from, different things, went from, okay, you've got time to work on this, here's the code and everything, here's the thing, okay, show me what you've got, show me what you've done in this time, I'm gonna give you 10 minutes to work on it, I'm gonna come back, everybody share, really relying very heavily upon the chat and people's feedback and everything. And it's really interesting how over the course of the day, it starts off feeling a little awkward, and it starts off feeling like, like, what am I doing? I'm using this strange medium to deal with people. And then by the end of the day, it's just like, hey, thank you guys so much. But Bill, it was so great to have you. Janine, it was awesome. And you have a relationship with people, even just through chat. And it's pretty amazing what you can do with it. So don't underestimate your ability to connect with people. If you show up, you have good content, you have a way to kind of interact and build that interactivity, and you will actually connect with people, and you will be able to use the medium to have the outcome that you want.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. So we have about 10 minutes left. I want to just remind everyone, any questions, definitely put them in the chat. Something to build off Doreen's question that's on here, I'd love to ask, what is like the one thing that you want to make sure people know about presenting virtually? Like if there was kind of this big takeaway, and it doesn't necessarily mean that's the last thing you're going to share with people. We might have 1 or 2 more questions, but what is something that you want to make sure that, people here leave understanding about what it means to present virtually, or to think about your path as a speaker virtually?
I would say basically kind of what I just said, that it seems like you're not going to be able to have this connection, but you are. And it's almost like you are, because we as humans are hardwired for connection, and we will get it by hook or by crook, right? Like we're going to find a way, like everybody's like, you know, especially extroverts. By the way, if you have extroverted friends, check on them. They're not doing well right now. If anybody's seen that meme, right? For those of us who are introverts are like, I don't have to leave the house. Awesome. But for the extroverts who are just, they're probably, you know, dying inside, just check on them, check on your extrovert friends. But that we have this opportunity to connect in a way that we haven't before, to connect with more people. I mean, that's kind of been the promise of the web from the very beginning, to be able to connect with people all over the world in different time zones and different places. And now it's like we're forced to do this, but it's great because it's really making us focus on the connections and the commonalities and the ways that we can show up and we can help each other and that we can be of service. And so I feel like I said, this is a really great opportunity for us to tap into all of those things, and also for us to actually benefit from basically from kind of the relief that we get by not having to go someplace, like you were talking about earlier, Margo, where you're just like, I can do this stuff and I can still tuck my daughter in. Like, I'm just a little late, you know, we just have dinner a little later. And it's all this that, you know, when we were having to leave and go and travel places, it was, you know, in a lot of ways, it was like somewhat disruptive. And I would just like to share a personal thing, which is, you know, having to travel a lot. I mean, in some ways I love it. I'm a Sagittarius, so like we love travel. But my body did not love it. And it's a cumulative effect of constant wear and tear of my body, and my immune system was getting trashed. And I had a respiratory infection that I got on December 23rd that I'm actually still trying to get over, and it's just lingering, just hanging out. And it's because every time I would have an opportunity to like start to overcome it, I would jump on an airplane again, have the audacity to go somewhere. And so this is also a great time for us to like really to be able to recover, to take care of ourselves, to rest and rejuvenate, but to still be able to have all the connection. That was a long answer, but that's how I feel.
Good one. Awesome. Yeah. Margo.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point around connection is so important for right now. I guess there's a few things I'm thinking about on that. The first maybe kind of runs counter to the idea of connection, but it's that everybody's favorite topic is themselves. And I think right now, because so many of us we don't have the opportunity to like say hi to coworkers or, you know, say hi to your favorite barista or whatever, and like share what they did on the weekend and whatnot. But I think now more than ever, we need to carve out those opportunities to connect and start every meeting by letting people vent and share and check in and see how they're doing. Those things that used to be maybe adjacent to our work lives, they're all here in our work lives because, you know, maybe your colleagues homeschooling at the same time, or their work life starts after their kid goes to bed now. And I think for all those reasons, we need to be able to check in and expose a little bit of that humanity, expose that we do contain multitudes. And when we start saying that the things that make us human and complex and complete are separate from work, that's when our work starts being too fragmented and not real anymore. So I think now is an opportunity to embrace and operationalize that kind of vulnerability of saying, here's where I am. And I mean, in my research around trust, like in a lot of the conversations that I'm having with corporations still, it's around how do we embrace and empower those ideas with voice, like a consistent and accessible natural language that helps people get up to speed on technical topics, with sharing like the right volume of information. And for us, that means now, how do we over communicate? How do we say, you know, here's my status online. Yes, I can still do that call, but you're going to hear some noise because I'm making dinner at the same time. And with vulnerability, to say, here's what I'm going through. Here's what I'm learning. In the earlier call today, one of the things that I shared was that if you remember back in the olden days of the 1980s, shoulder pads were in. We all want to seem like we were larger than life, bigger than we were. I think the brands wore shoulder pads because they spoke in the third person and they didn't expose kind of the inner working or release products until they were completely polished. And now in the era of Kickstarter, brands have gotten used to speaking in the first person and saying, we had a delay, or here's what went wrong, but here's what we learned and here's how we're going to make it better. And I think that's something that we can all embrace in our work as well, to expose what's going on, how we're learning, how we've discovered what we don't know, but how we're going to improve on it. And I feel like that's part of the humanity that we bring into conversations now. And then going back and kind of embracing and offering grace and patience and flexibility to our colleagues, to our clients and prospective audiences, as well as to ourselves. You know, when, you know, the camera gets knocked over or the lighting isn't great, to be able to say, what can I do to improve it so you can see me? I think all that helps to make us more whole and empathetic, maybe for the first time.
And you know, Margo, one of the things that occurred to me, the word that actually popped into my mind with this is like that this is such an amazing, I mean, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to get woo-woo for a minute. I'm from a hippie town, so, you know, I'm going to just get a pass for this, but that this is such an opportunity for healing on so many levels, right? That we are being able to kind of heal this broken relationship, this kind of broken way of showing up for work and trying to present this facade and this way of being that actually wasn't honest and wasn't authentic and wasn't true. And now it's just like, you know, we're just like getting kind of see like all the kind of messy humanity of it all. And it's wonderful. It's like, you're tired, rest, you're overwhelmed, like, you know, reach out to somebody. You're feeling grief about this, you know, like express your grief. You want to dance, like, and that there's this wonderful honesty, I think, that's coming forth and coming through in this. And I actually wanted to say this earlier. If you're a new speaker and you've been wanting to talk about something, I also think that this is a wonderful time to like with Margo saying, you know, like you don't have to put yourself out there, because maybe this is a really good time for you to think about, is that what I really want to talk about? Or is there something else? Is there something else that's coming forth, that's coming up, that's bubbling up now, that is more my truth and really more in my wheelhouse of passion and expertise than this thing that I thought I should talk about? Right. And so that we also have this great opportunity to really take a step back and have a moment of pause and really get in touch with and to start expressing what is genuinely and truly inside of ourselves and what we have to share with the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. A good opportunity to reflect and connect and be vulnerable. That's great. We are just about at time. I'm actually, when we get to the end time, I'm going to leave this open for a few minutes in case people want to continue in the chat, if our speakers have some time to stick around and answer some additional questions. But I do want to make sure everyone can leave when they need to. If you have a quick answer for Samantha, she asked about fragmented attention. If you have, especially maybe if someone who, you know, can only pay attention for 30 seconds to listen to the answer. What advice would you give for virtual, how to keep people focused if they're, you know, being drawn to other things?
I have two things to say very quickly. The first one is for the person themselves. Samantha, don't give yourself a hard time for, like, you know, not being able to pay attention, because it's actually hard to try to pay attention to a lot of things. Our brains actually aren't wired that way, number one. And number two, if you're presenting something, to actually try to keep like very clear, succinct answers. If you've got a list of something, say I've got 3 things. The first one's this, the second one's this, the third one's that. And to make sure that you give people kind of guideposts and places that they can attach their attention to, so that they don't have to work so hard to follow you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Margo, anything to add to that?
I also think that the more we can tap into the different ways that people learn, and this may mean putting some more words on our slides, but to give people that are visual learners let them see the jargon and internalize it as they're hearing an explanation from you that echoes those words at the same time, so that we're giving them kind of multiple hooks to latch on to maybe more technical concepts or just new ideas that we're introducing. I don't think that online communication and online seminars mean that we need to simplify and dumb things down, but rather that we need to translate it to engage people in a more multi-sensory way.
Most definitely.
Amazing. Thank you so much. A huge thank you to Margo and Denise for sharing all their experience and advice. This has been so awesome, and it's been really fun to be able to host this twice today with them. Thank you to all of you for joining and asking your questions and being engaged. This chat was really awesome to see going throughout and you all sharing with one another. I love one of the things I heard mentioned before for speakers, not in this group, but that it can be hard to not have your applause at the end. So if you all want to put something in the chat and your way of showing your applause for the speakers, that would be really wonderful. And as I mentioned, we'll keep this open for a couple more minutes for those of you who do want to continue to chat with one another. If you have any additional questions for our panelists, and then we'll sign off. And we do have a feedback survey that will prompt right after this. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that too. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And whoever wants to stay for the next, however long, I'm happy to stay on. Yeah.
Cool. I think there might have been a question in the chat, but if someone wants to put it in the Q&A, because there's so many other things that happen in the chat, it could be hard to hear that.
I think, Doreen, you asked about, gamifying things too. Yeah, what do you think about gamifying to keep people alert, like give a free something to the first person who can answer to earlier content? I mean, I don't like to place demands on people, especially now if they're rightfully distracted by competing priorities. I don't want to do anything that is condescending. But at the same time, like if I'm in front of a quiet audience, and I need some engagement from them because I feed off of that. I love saying, whether it's my class line or an audience in the room, I point out that we work in a very participatory industry. It's based on conversation, so I need to hear them, and class participation matters. And then, I'll also do things to incentivize earlier participation, like say, you only get points if it's a new idea that somebody hasn't already raised in Slack, or with giveaways. Yeah, I definitely think that can work too. But I want to approach it in a humble and understanding way, I guess.
And I kind of feel like I don't have anything to add to that. I think those are all really great ideas. So yeah, buzzing with creativity and ideas. I love that. I love that. Does anybody else have any other questions for us that we may have missed, or that a burning question that you wanted to have answered that we didn't get to?
The other thing I'll mention is that we will send out a recording of this to everyone who attended, and then encourage you to continue the conversation too on Twitter. Again, we're #CouchConvo, and at Women Talk Design, at Denise Jacobs, and at Bloomstein.
Oh, there's a question about, I'm sorry, Danielle, I'm like,
yeah, go for it.
Business.
Go for it. We're leaving this is like the loosey-goosey end that we said that we were going to have.
So advice for fee rates for speakers at different levels. So Kat, can you give us just a little bit more background on what you're looking for with that question? Because I would like to see that. And while you're doing that, we can go to Christina's on engagement tips. Active learning approaches. So one of the things that, so well, we can go to that question in a moment. I wanted to talk to Christina's question about engagement tips and active learning approaches. One of the things I personally really like baking in engagement into my talks, and I was kind of talking about it earlier, about like having exercises that you're asking people to participate in,
and then actually acting as if they're having them, and then they're actually doing that, and then actually getting the feedback for it as well. And so I think there's actually a technique called applied improvisation, and it's based on kind of exercises and techniques that people do in improv. And it's a really, really effective way to engage people and to get people kind of tap into their playful and kind of creative and innovative sides. So I actually would really recommend looking into the Applied Improvisation Network. There's a Facebook group that you can join. There is a conference. I don't know if it's going to go virtual or not this year, but there's a conference every year. And you can learn all kinds of really fantastic ways that also translate, I believe, into virtual stuff from that group.
Awesome. Thank you, Denise. And I know that there was just some more context on the question about speaker fees. We had both the question of, wait, you can get paid, which I've definitely heard before. Holly, you are not alone in that reaction. And then also Kat sharing a bit more about, fee tiers for different speakers based on if you're new to speaking or you've done some of it, like how to think about, where you might be in what you should ask for, essentially.
I have a lot of opinions about this, but I don't want to keep, Margo, if you've got stuff, I don't want to take that away from you.
I want to hear your opinions too.
So I talk to people a lot about, so in my own personal experience, for the longest time, for at least 2 years, if not more, I was doing all of my speaking. I think I got offered to get paid once, but I was doing all of my speaking with the belief, very mistaken belief, that once I got good, then people would start to offer to pay me. I can't tell you how profoundly incorrect that is, and nobody is going to give you money until you start to ask for it. So I was talking earlier about sitting in your value and understanding and knowing your value, trusting that what you have is valuable. The things that you're doing now and that you're speaking about now, it's not an hour talk that you're giving. It is the years of experience that came before the moment you get on stage that they're paying for, and nothing else, right? Like that is just a culmination point, but everything leading up to that informs and goes into the fact that you should be getting paid for your expertise and your knowledge. So take that into consideration. Then the other thing is that I usually tell people, think of a number, especially if you're beginning, think of a number, and most likely I say, and then double it, because most people are just like, oh, I don't know, like $500. I'm like, no. I was like, and if it's less than $1,500, like make it more, because there's a certain point where sometimes people don't have budget, and that's a very real thing. But a lot of the times when people do events, they have budget for speakers somehow or another. Maybe it's not a lot, maybe it's a nominal fee, maybe they pay all the speakers the same amount because they want to make it democratized. Maybe it's a totally different, maybe they can have sponsorship. There's a lot of ways to slice it up, but for them to say they're going to give you exposure or whatever is unfair. So get a number, talk to different people. Usually if you're a new speaker, somewhere, within the like $1,000 to $2,000 range, you start to be a little more seasoned of a speaker, then it goes up between like 3 and 5. Then once you start getting and you're more seasoned, then it's like 5 to 7.5 or 8. Then, like people who are professional speakers who are apparently, doing well by themselves start being above $10,000. 15 is another tier, and then 20 and 20 is like more people who are, almost like, I would say like star speakers, right? So get a number and just start asking for it, because nobody is gonna, out of the kindness of their heart, is gonna just be like, oh, well, like give you money. You have to establish your own value, and then people will follow suit. Does that make sense? Sorry, I'm very passionate about this, as you can see.
No, this is great. I love I was just gonna say, I love all the excitement in the chat. Like, this is clearly a conversation many people want to have, and I want us to do a follow-up couch combo on it. Margo, what would you like to add, and then we'll make this the last question.
I'm going to offer a slight counterpoint on that.
Okay, go
keep
Margo.
things interesting.
So you have your fee, and it does not change until it does.
That's right.
Because, well, there was the point in the chat that, like, you don't get paid in exposure because exposure is what kills people. When you're starting out,
Yes.
when you're starting out, though, you do want to figure out different ways to get exposure. So I would say, have your value, know your worth, and sometimes that is expressed through money. Sometimes it's expressed through the opportunity to connect with somebody at that conference, the opportunity to go to a city where you've never spoken before, but they're willing to cover your travel. Like, I had a conference that I was going to be speaking at before it went virtual. And there, they couldn't pay the rate that I had asked, but one of their sponsors was an airline or some sort of travel affiliated brand. So they were able to give me an additional plane ticket so that my husband could come with me as well. So there was like kind of value in it for me. So there's other things in there. Maybe it's that you really want to be able to speak in front of that association, because associations comprise lots and lots of corporations and companies that are always bringing in speakers. So, I mean, as a speaker, you are putting butts in seats. You are the most valuable part of the conference. So see how they're willing to value and treat you, and then know what you want to get out of it.
And so please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying being a hard nose about it. Like I said, from 2010 until 2013, I was not really, I got like paid for one speaking engagement out of all that. And those years, it was like every year I did more and more speaking engagements. But I finally had a friend who was like, wait, you're not getting paid? You're not asking? And I was like, oh, what should I ask? And she was like, girl, you better start asking. And when I started asking, first a couple of times, I said, here's my number. And people were like, ooh, we can't do that. And I was like, hey, I hope you have a great conference. And then the next people who asked me, I said my number, and I could tell by their response that they were so excited because they thought I was going to be more expensive. Then I came up with another number. I said it to the next people. They were like, okay, great. Didn't even think twice about it. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? So it is, sometimes it's about perceived value. Sometimes it's about the budget that they have. You certainly need to be flexible and to weigh and value what other things are of value for you. But I think the thing that I want you to leave you with is trust, because what happens is a lot of people question whether they have value or not. And what I want you to know is what you're doing and the expertise that you're doing and the act of sharing your knowledge is valuable. And if you leave with nothing else, know that, and that value can have a dollar amount to it, and that you deserve to get paid for your time and your expertise.
This is so incredible. You two are so amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time, for staying extra to answering questions. And again, if y'all who are still here have additional questions, hashtag couch combo, tag Denise and Margo and Women Talk Design. We can keep this going. We hope to do more couch combos too. So again, thank you so much, Margo and Denise, and everyone who joined, and have a good rest of your evening.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye.